Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes pretty fast if you're the car chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, it's the Car Chick. Today on the Straight Shift, I want to talk about a topic that's a little more serious than I normally like to tackle, but I think it's important for everyone to understand what has happened recently in the news. You may have seen that last Sunday night on March 25th, a woman was killed on a city street in Tempe, Arizona by a self-driving car. It's caused a lot of shakeup in the news. Obviously, this was one of Uber's cars, and they have suspended testing as a result, and obviously it's made a lot of headlines. At about 10 o'clock last Sunday night, 49-year-old Elaine Hertzberg was struck by a self-driving Uber car, which had a human safety driver in the driver's seat at the time, but no Uber passengers in the back. This was just a part of a big testing. She was crossing a normal four-lane city street in Tempe, Arizona, when the car struck and killed her. They're still investigating this situation. And first, I just want to say that my heart goes out to Ms. Hertzberg's family. This is a horrible tragedy, and they're going to be dissecting this accident, for many months to come to figure out really what happened, and did the self-driving cars' automated systems malfunction? Did they just fail to predict this situation? What really happened? So first, I want to talk about how do self-driving cars actually work, give you guys some insight into the technology, how it works, where the testing stands, who's doing the testing and where, so that you're aware of where that technology stands in the marketplace. And then I'll come back and talk about this accident, as well as a couple of others that have happened over the last couple of years during testing, so that we can really understand some of the limitations of these systems and how, as human drivers and as pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists, what do we need to do to keep ourselves and others safe on the road? So let's talk for a few minutes about how do self-driving cars actually work. If you've seen my video from the Charlotte Auto Show last fall on my YouTube channel, which you can get to carchick-tv.com, one of the biggest things that I talk about is the technology that exists in our cars here in 2018 that are called driver aids. I call them electronic babysitters, but I'm kind of warming up to them. This is the collision mitigation braking, where if you don't react fast enough, the car brakes for you. It's the blind spot monitoring. It's all the cameras the cars have. This is the technology that has come out of the self-driving car research and testing that is slowly making its way into mainstream production cars that you and I can buy. Now, we're still a long way away from being able to purchase automated self-driving cars as consumers, but they have been out on the roads under testing conditions for almost a decade. It started with Google's self-driving car project, and has, Uber's now doing it, Lyft is now doing it, Cruise, which is an automated car company owned by GM, they're doing this. They're testing in several states like Arizona, California, and even up in Canada in the Toronto area, because these states have said, hey, we have some good conditions for doing this testing. We're willing to work with you because the regulations around this technology are miles behind where the technology actually is. And that happens in our society. The technology always moves faster than the laws and the regulations, and the poor insurance companies still have no idea how to deal with this. So there's been a good cooperation between state governments and these technology companies to work together to really vet these cars, test them out, so that someday they can be on the roads, because both regulators and the technologists agree that ultimately these self-driving cars will very likely be safer than human drivers. Why? They're not distracted like we are. And these computers can do incredible calculations and they can be programmed to obey traffic laws. But the biggest thing is, they're not reacting to the kids in the back seat. They're not checking their cell phone. They're not changing the radio station and singing along and thinking about that project at work. All they're doing is focusing on the driving. So let's talk about how that works. A self-driving car is a little bit of a misnomer. We have to remember, and this recent tragic accident really underlines that very strongly, that these cars are not completely autonomous. We cannot simply trust them to drive 100% on their own and be able to handle every possible crazy scenario that can come up in driving. So what these cars are capable of is they sense their environment and they can navigate themselves through that environment without a human doing anything at the controls. Now, to accomplish this task, it needs a few different things. It's got to have a good GPS unit with what's called an inertial navigation system. And it's got a whole bunch of sensors and cameras, including laser range finders and radar. That's something called LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. That's the remote sensing technology that we've been using for decades to detect what's going on, to see what's going on the ocean floor, to detect, oil or other natural resources underneath the ground. It's what the police have used in states that use lasers to catch us speeding instead of just plain radar. So that's what LiDAR is. And they're using these in the self-driving cars. So what it does is that LiDAR system combined with the 360 video cameras, they send out laser beams all around the car. And those laser beams, they travel, and when they encounter an object, they bounce off that object and then come back to the car's system. And the car's computer then measures, well, how far did it go and how long did it take for the laser to get there and back? That's how they catch us speeding with these things. But the car uses that data and does a bunch of math to create a three-dimensional map of the environment all around it. And it can tell by the shape, its size, and behavior of the objects that the lasers encounter to be able to interpret what that object might be. Is it another vehicle that is moving? And if it's of a certain shape and size and moving at a certain speed, is it a car? Is it a truck? Is it a motorcycle? Is it a bicycle? Or is it a pedestrian? So for example, if the laser system detects a two-wheeled rectangle moving at 40 miles an hour, that's probably a motorcycle because it's moving too fast to be a bicycle, and it can tell it only has two wheels, so it's not a car. So it categorizes that object on its map as a motorcycle. And based on the direction and the velocity that object is moving, it can predict to a certain extent where that motorcycle is going to be over the next several minutes that it's in the vehicle's environment. And that sounds really remarkable. And it is. It's an artificial intelligence system. But if you think about it, that's what we do as humans. We look at our environment and we're able to recognize shapes and colors. And based on how they're moving and what they're doing, we know that's a person, that's a cyclist, that's a car. And so these systems are being programmed with that human recognition broken down into logical processes so that the computer can do the same thing that our brains can do in identifying the environment. So then once the vehicle kind of creates that map and puts all these obstacles into all these categories, it literally builds a three-dimensional map of its surroundings. And then it uses its GPS system to say, where am I in this map? It precisely locates itself in that map. And once it has that complete picture, it can use the GPS navigational data to say what is the best path through these obstacles to get to my destination. That is a very simplistic breakdown of how that works. It's called a process of localization, mapping, obstacle detection, and path planning. And the computer continuously does this. It's continually sending out those radar signals. It's using its video cameras to then augment that data with the color of those objects. So it knows the difference between a stop sign and a no entry sign or a falling debris sign. So it's really pretty sophisticated, but it's not foolproof. GPS data can be inaccurate. It can be delayed by signals, having to bounce off the satellites in the atmosphere. If you've got certain weather conditions, it can delay those signals. If, the lasers can bounce a little inaccurately, depending on the reflective surface, or if it's raining, or if it's snowing, or if it's foggy, there's a lot of things that can interfere with those systems. Just as a lot of those things, especially, weather and light conditions, can interfere with our human detection systems, with our eyes and our brain as well. So it's important to know that these things are not completely foolproof. But it's still really, really impressive that the vehicle can do all these things and make all these calculations and accumulate all this data and keep it in its memory, the way, almost the way a human does, and do it over and over and over and over and over again, lightning fast, to constantly keep track of its environment and have a vehicle actually be able to drive itself through that environment towards its destination. So in a nutshell, that is how so-called self-driving vehicles work. We're going to take a real quick break, and when I come back, I'm going to talk about what happened with this recent tragic accident in Arizona, as well as a couple of others that have happened over the last couple of years. We're going to break it down and really look at why did these things happen, and where do we go going forward with this technology. Hang on there, folks. I'll be right back in 60 seconds. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of, or about finding the right car at a fair price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 888-575-2138. That's 888-575-2138. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Ah, the Car Chick is back for more Straight Shift.
Welcome back to the Straight Shift. Today we're talking about self-driving cars, because last Sunday night a woman was tragically killed by a self-driving Uber car in Tempe, Arizona, when she was crossing the street late one night with her bicycle. And I have covered in the first half of this podcast about what self-driving cars really are and how that technology works. And while it's remarkable, it's still in its relatively early phases of testing. They've only been testing self-driving cars for about a decade, and we have a long way to go yet before this technology is truly reliable enough to predict all the random crazy things that can happen on a road well enough that they will be safe to be sold to consumers and start kind of taking over our roads, which is a separate issue. But I want to talk about a couple of the other incidents that have also happened over the last few years. Honestly, there have been relatively few incidents involving self-driving cars over the last decade in their testing in various cities. This one that happened last weekend is the first pedestrian death as a result of a self-driving car testing. Now, last March, also in Tempe, Arizona, where they've been doing a lot of their testing, there was another accident involving a self-driving Uber. And what happened there is, the Uber car, which the Uber is using the Volvo XC90 SUVs, which are very safe to begin with. And it was just driving along. All of these cars while they're testing, they have a human, what's called a safety driver, in the driver's seat as a backup. And that person's job is to sit there in the driver's seat and pay attention to the road as if they were actively driving, have their hands hovering over the steering wheel, have their right foot hovering over the brake pedal, so that if the system does not react in time to avoid a collision, that is their job to do. Now, in some of these situations, that driver, was unable to react. And so last year when there was an incident, what happened was the self-driving Uber car was going through an intersection. They had the green light when that car was T-boned by another vehicle, which was being driven by a human who was clearly not paying attention and blew through a red light and T-boned the Uber car, rolling it over. There were no passengers in there. The safety driver was perfectly fine. No one was seriously injured. And the police ruled the accident the fault of the human driver who blew through the stoplight. So, that was a situation where the self-driving car was doing everything it was supposed to be doing. It just couldn't account for somebody blowing through a red light and T-boning it. As human drivers, anybody who has ever been in that situation, that's one of the hardest accidents to avoid. If you are already through the intersection and somebody just goes barreling through a red light, I try and look further down. I just am very cautious and always assume that someone might do that. But even then, that type of thing can be very hard to avoid. So not the Uber car's fault in that situation. Now, a couple years ago, there was an incident, back in 2016, a gentleman who had one of the cool Teslas was driving. They have an autopilot feature. Tesla's really the only car on the market that has something close to a true self-driving feature. But they will be the first ones to tell you that their system, which is called autopilot, which I would argue is not a good name because it implies that you can let the car just do everything while you sit back, take a nap, read a book, do something other than pay attention. And so they might want to rename that, so Tesla, if you're listening, you might want to think about that. But, even they say that autopilot mode still requires the full driver engagement at all times. And I'm very, very sorry that, this gentleman was killed, because what happened was he was driving an autopilot on a state highway in Florida, and the car crashed into a tractor trailer that was crossing the road in front of the car. Now, what happened was it was a very bright day in Florida, and the tractor trailer was white, and the sky was very bright and white. And so the LiDAR system was not able to differentiate between the white tractor trailer and the bright sky behind it, so it didn't realize there was an object there. This is why, as a driver, even if you have a car that has this autopilot mode, you still need to be paying attention. The data showed that several minutes prior to this happening, the driver put on the cruise control, put it into autopilot mode. But based on the data, he still had 7 seconds to realize there was a truck crossing his path and to take control of the car and react. 7 seconds is a lot of time. And, while, I don't want to sound like I'm blaming the victim here, but you have to recognize, if you have one of these cars, autopilot does not really mean autopilot. You still have to pay attention because these systems are not perfect. We are not in the Star Trek or Jetsons era where we truly have cars that we can just sit in the back seat and the car chauffeurs you around. And believe me, I'm sure everybody that drives to work in horrible stop and go commuter traffic every day cannot wait until our cars can do that, because then we can just sit back and, take some conference calls, do some work, put on our makeup, shave, whatever we need to do while the car drives us to work. We are not there yet, not even close. So that was a situation where it was a limitation. The system didn't fail. It was merely a limitation of the system. And obviously, they're working to make these systems better and better. But we still, as drivers, need to pay attention, and we cannot rely on these cars. So, what happened last Sunday was, obviously very tragic. And again, my heart goes out to Miss Hertzberg's family for their tragic loss in this. And this incident is still heavily, heavily under investigation. Uber is fully cooperating. They and the other autonomous car testing companies have suspended testing so that they can really dig into this situation, figure out what happened. But here is what we do know right now. They have released the dash cam footage from the self-driving car. And it has two dash cams. It has the dash cam that's looking forward, but it also has a dash cam that is looking at the safety driver that is behind the wheel, who is supposed to be the backup system. Here's what we know. It was 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, so it was very dark. And from the dash cam footage combined with the kind of an overhead map view of the road, it looked to be a 4-lane, highway, not a freeway, but, 4-lane busy road. There seemed to be a few number of lights. From the dash cam footage, it was really, really dark. So it was in an area where there was a limited number of street lights. The dash cam footage is very disturbing. You can Google it if you want to watch it, but they did cut it off before the actual impact because that's just too graphic. But it does give you an indication of kind of what the car was seeing and what the safety driver was doing and not doing. The victim was crossing this 4-lane road while pushing her bicycle. There was not a crosswalk. There was not a controlled intersection. So we're not quite sure why she was crossing this large road in the dark in a place where there was not extra safety features around to help make it safer for her to do so. And the safety driver, the car did not make any attempt to stop. The car never saw this pedestrian. The safety driver made no attempts to slam on the brakes. This all happened very, very quickly. Now, the safety driver, who is fully cooperating with the police and with Uber, obviously, the dash cam footage does show that she was not watching the road. She would glance up at the road and then would look down for a long period of time. She would glance up at the road, look down for a long period of time. So I don't know if she was on her phone and texting or reading something or what she was doing, but her 100% of her attention was not focused on the road ahead. That being said, in watching the dash cam footage, it was really, really, really dark. And by the time the headlights of the car showed the pedestrian and her bicycle, she was right smack dead center in front of the car. So it almost looked like as the car was approaching that part of the road, you could see a street light beforehand, but then it got really super dark. It was like this area of very, very deep shadow. And literally, as soon as the headlight shined and showed this pedestrian, she was literally right in front of the car. And you see the safety driver going, and suddenly reacting. And so had this been a normal car with a normal human driver behind the wheel, would that human driver have seen the pedestrian sooner and been able to stop in time? Based on that dash cam footage, which granted it's black and white, it's not super high resolution, but I have a dash cam that has night vision, and so I'm used to watching dash cams. I don't know that a human driver could have reacted in time. This is one of those situations where, it's one of those crazy, unpredictable things. Now, the LiDAR systems really are supposed to be able to see better than human eyes at night. They do have a certain degree of night vision capabilities. So a big open question is, why did that system not detect the pedestrian sooner? If this were a human driver, if just based on the information that is available in the dash cam footage that I have seen, I would be shocked if a human driver who was even paying really good attention could have prevented this. They may not have seen her. It was really, really dark. And again, I am no way trying to blame the victim here, and there's still so much that we don't know. But we have a few takeaways coming out of this tragic incident. And, the first one is obviously that self-driving cars are still a long way away from being really reliable. Just like humans, they cannot predict every crazy situation that comes up on the roads. And even those of us that are driving modern cars that have a lot of those driver aid technologies that I mentioned at the beginning of this show, the collision braking with pedestrian detection, Nissan has that, Toyota has that, Honda has that. A lot of the manufacturers have built that technology into their cars. But here's the thing. These are systems that are supposed to help mitigate. They're supposed to be a last resort backup system for the driver. The number one safety feature in any vehicle is the driver. So we have got to pay attention and look around. And when we're driving down a really dark road, really be looking around, turn your high beams on. A lot of times we don't like to do that because we don't want to risk blinding other drivers on the other side, so you need to be able to flip them off real quick. But, those high beams can be important when it's a really, really dark road. And also as cyclists, as motorcyclists, as pedestrians, we also have a responsibility to obey the rules of the road and just take extra caution to keep ourselves safe. I can't tell you how many times, I walk around my neighborhood and it includes one, reasonably busy road. I walk a lot at night. And I think about, gosh, I wear black all the time and I'm walking around the neighborhood at night wearing black. That's probably not the brightest idea. So this incident has me thinking, maybe I should invest in a reflective vest. When my husband goes with me, he wears this hat that I got him that has a little light on it, which is hilarious. So he walks around with a little headlamp on. But we do that for safety. And so, as pedestrians, and cyclists and motorcycles, it is a lot easier for us to see cars, especially at night, because the cars have headlights. So, that's so that they can be seen. And we need to look for those headlights around us and be aware of where they are and keep ourselves safe because the law of lug nuts says we're going to lose. And so, we need to take that responsibility to keep ourselves safe, as well as the drivers taking responsibility to drive safely and pay attention. And obviously, the self-driving car companies that are testing this technology, they are working very hard to make sure that their technology evolves as much as possible. And they've made huge advances in the last decade to make these self-driving cars that we've seen in movies and TV shows on sci-fi a reality. But there still remain a number of technological barriers with, the limited reliability of GPS signals and laser technology, which can be affected by things like weather conditions. And there's also the limitations of the car's computer systems to be able to accurately and completely understand and interpret the crazy scenarios that can happen on the road. They're just not the same level as human drivers and the way our brains process things yet. That artificial intelligence has a way to go. And, this transition from, us driving our cars to the cars driving us is going to be very gradual. It's going to be a bumpy road. And unfortunately, this is probably not going to be the last tragedy that occurs in this testing process. Now, to put a little of it into perspective, according to the National Safety Council, in 2016, there were over 37,000 fatalities due to motor vehicle accidents. And last year in 2017, there were over 40,000 traffic fatalities. So, granted, there's a lot more cars out there. It kind of translates to about 1.1 to 1.2 traffic fatalities per million vehicles traveled. which isn't bad. It's gotten a lot safer over the last few decades, but we still have a long way to go. The Google's cars have only driven about 5 million miles. Uber is about at 3 million miles of their testing. And so the fact that there have only been a couple of incidents since that testing began is a really good sign, but it doesn't minimize the tragedies that have recently happened. And it certainly, gives us a lot of room for improvement going forward. So thank you for listening today. I know this was a little bit more of a depressing topic than I like to cover, but I think it's important for people to understand this technology and where it stands in the marketplace and what the technology companies are doing along with the state lawmakers, insurance companies, et cetera, to really forge this new territory. We are on, unproven ground, and it's just going to take time to work through the kinks. Again, my heart and sympathies go out to Ms. Hertzberg's family, and my prayers are with you guys. Everyone else, please drive, walk, and bike safely out there. Bye-bye.
The Straight Shift Podcast is copyright Leanne Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of Leanne Shattuck or The Car Chick.